How many remember the name Tevye? Tevye was a dairyman who carried on lengthy conversations with God. You might remember the amazing soliloquy at the beginning of Fiddler on the Roof, where he looks out at the audience and he says to the audience, "A fiddler on the roof. Sounds crazy, no? But in our little village of Anatevka, you might say every one of us is a fiddler on the roof, trying to scratch out a pleasant, simple tune without breaking his neck. It isn't easy. You may ask, why do we stay up here if it's so dangerous? We stay because Anatevka is our home. And how do we keep our balance? That I can tell you in one word: tradition. Because of our traditions, we kept our balance for many, many years. Here in Anatevka, we have traditions for everything: how we eat, how we sleep, how we wear clothes. For instance, we always keep our heads covered and always wear a prayer shawl. This shows our constant devotion to God. You may ask, how did this tradition start? I'll tell you. I don't know, but it's tradition. Because of our traditions, everyone knows who he is and what God expects of him. Now, you may leave here tonight with the songs of Fiddler on the Roof on your mind. Traditions are great. They're wonderful. We all have them. But in the gospel this weekend, Jesus has a sharp exchange with the Pharisees about their traditions. He chides them. Why? It's because they have made the tradition itself the religion. Their traditions, their laws, their regulations, their rules have become more important than the welfare of the people themselves. They had outward observances, but there was no inward change. And James, in that second reading, is also very challenging. He challenges all of us, as he did then 2,000 years ago, to be doers of the word, not just hearers. He tells us not to delude ourselves by just giving lip service to our beliefs, that we have to live the beliefs out. Now, we all need traditions, but they can be empty if we don't know why we do them, or if they become the end-all and the be-all. Jesus was certainly not opposed to rituals and ceremonies. However, he didn't want us to substitute these rituals for authentic religion or ceremonies for compassion towards others. The famous French sociologist Émile Durkheim discovered how essential and vital ritual is for the health and maintenance of any social institution. Studies have shown, for example, that in the absence of consistent ritual, families tend to fall apart morally and psychologically. So traditions serve to bind people together, and they make for a more cohesive group. But they can also be silly and inconsequential. Now, it's for this very reason that Pope Francis has called for an extraordinary synod of bishops that is entitled The Pastoral Challenges of the Family in the Context of Evangelization. It started last October and will continue its work this coming October. Francis is courageous enough to look at our own rules and regulations to make sure that they are not silly and inconsequential. He's very much aware that the issues of family require deeper interpretation given the signs of the times. And he's very concerned, and he wants us as church to be very concerned about the overwhelming struggles in marriage and family life. Francis really is struggling to be like Jesus, to place the needs of people before laws and regulations and rituals and traditions. He wants all of us to reflect on what we are doing for the family unit and how we can be much more pastoral. He realizes, as did Jesus, that some of our traditions can get out of hand. He is aware of how the Pharisees and the teachers of the law allowed the ritual of not eating without washing one's hands to become a worse sin than how one treated one's neighbor. Their traditions had overtaken their religion. And this is one of the greatest dangers of traditions. You see, tradition is certainly one guide for our behavior, but it's only one guide. Times change, situations change. Far more important is the living Spirit of God that is moving in our midst right now, guiding us in our present situation. The great Roman Catholic scholar Yves Congar tells us that tradition is really a flowing stream. It's not a stagnant pond. And when it becomes stagnant, it does a lot more harm than good. Motion, development, flow, these characterize true traditionalism. Now, if we read the scriptures, we know that Jesus was always getting into arguments with the Pharisees. The great scripture scholar William Barclay puts it very eloquently. He said, in attacking the Pharisees, Jesus was attacking a system which put rules and regulations before the claim of human need. The commandment of God was that the claim of human love and human ties should come first. The commandment of the scribes was that the claim of legal rules and regulations should come first. Jesus was quite sure that any rule and regulation which prevented one from giving help where help was needed was nothing less than a contradiction of the law of God. We must never allow rules and regulations to paralyze the claims of charity and love. Nothing that prevents us from helping a fellow man can ever be a rule or ever be approved by God. Now, there's a true story. And the story is about Queen Victoria, who was at a diplomatic reception in London. The guest of honor was an African chieftain. All went well during the meal until at the end, the finger bowls were served. The guest of honor had never seen a British finger bowl before, and no one thought to brief him beforehand about its purpose. So he took the finger bowl in his two hands, he lifted it to his mouth, and he drank its contents, down to the very last drop. And for an instant, there was a breathless silence among the British upper crust, and they all began to whisper to one another. You can only imagine what they were saying. But all that stopped in the next instant as Queen Victoria silently took her finger bowl in her two hands, lifted it, and drank its contents. A moment later, 500 surprised British ladies and gentlemen simultaneously drank the contents of their own finger bowls. It was against the rules to drink from the finger bowl. But on that particular evening, Victoria changed the rules, because she was, after all, the queen. When tradition gets in the way of love, it becomes a bad thing. In Fiddler on the Roof, tradition causes Tevye, a good man, to turn against his daughter Shava because she married outside the faith. It's a tragic scene in Fiddler when Tevye announces to his wife Golda that their daughter Shava is now dead to us. How utterly wasteful and unnecessary, we might think. But whatever Tevye is, he is a man of principle. And he says that if he bends that far, he will break. Tradition becomes deadly when it disrupts human relationships. One can only grieve at the tragedy of religion becoming a thing that divides and hurts when God intends it to unite and heal. Tradition gets in the way when it harms human beings. And isn't it interesting in that marvelous soliloquy that begins Fiddler on the Roof, that Tevye asks the question, and you may ask me, how did this tradition start? I will tell you, I don't know. It's even more dangerous when we don't know why we do what we do.